Hello and welcome to the Zero to Keystone Master Challenge, done from the perspective of someone that has exclusively played World of Warcraft Classic. Now, to provide some context, as of recent, I've definitely been getting the retail itch. I currently raid lead a guild in Wrath of Lich King Classic. We currently have Alduar on farm, we re-clear, we do things like trying to speed clear, and it's all good fun, but it kind of hasn't really been scratching that competitive itch, both in terms of trying to play at the highest level and also playing a more involved class, I suppose is the right word. Now, Assassination Rogue in Wrath Classic is dead easy, which is great. It makes it easy to multitask, play in the class, and raid leading. Um, Retail Rogue is a bit of a different story. Now, I'll get into this more a little bit later on. I think Sub Rogue is actually a very new character-friendly class for people that may be interested in getting into retail. Um, I don't know much about other classes, but just from my experience playing Sub Rogue in particular. And so what inspired me to make this series was seeing similar content on YouTube. In particular, Galia GGTV, watched his series. It's a lot of fun, really cool. I thought it'd be fun to do it from the perspective of a new main, of somebody that's new to retail. Now, I guess you could say I'm kind of cheating because I have WoW experience. In particular, I've mained a rogue forever. Um, I played a lot back during Cataclysm. That was kind of my prime time before I stepped away from the game for a bit. Came back for Classic, have been playing maining Rogue from Classic to TBC to Wrath. And so when I started to, when I booted up retail, Rogue was just kind of the first thing to turn to. And actually, it wasn't the case that I wanted to play Rogue. It was just my Rogue on retail was the highest level, and I didn't want to level. So I was like, okay, I guess we're playing the Rogue because what I want to do was run Mythics or Mythic Plus. I think the whole I think the whole idea behind Mythic Plus is super cool, super intriguing. A scaling difficulty where you and five other people are put to the test to try and perform as well as possible in order to clear the dungeon within a set amount of time. I think that challenge is really fun, really enticing, and it brought me to the game to want to play. So we're gonna jump in here now. Unfortunately, had I done planned this out in advance, I would have recorded my leveling up experience. I would have shared my discovery of some of the new game systems that I wasn't familiar with. And if I could summarize, I don't want to bore everyone here, but I basically quested to level up. All right, I just did the quest lines in the various zones, and that was fine. It took a decent amount of time. I don't remember exactly. I hit 70 and just immediately wanted to start getting the keys. Now, immediately wanted to start getting the keys. I spent a little bit of time trying to get some gear, which for me, I still hadn't finished all the Dragonflight quest lines, and I knew that there was this item in the game called a Spark of Ingenuity, which allowed you to craft very powerful pieces of gear. But in order to get access to it, you had to finish the main Dragonflight storyline. So I spent a lot of time immediately after taking 70 finishing those quests. A, so I could get access to the Sparks of Ingenuity, and B, so I could get some better gear. Which, as somebody that's been playing this game for a while, might think, wow, that what good is like 343 eye level gear, which for me was a huge upgrade over like my 200 eye level pieces that I had from questing in the Oharan Plains or whatever. Uh, so I spent my time doing that. Once I finished the quest line, I had to learn about the crafting systems, and essentially throughout this journey that I'm going to take you on as an audience, I want to really walk through the kind of insight I gained running Mythic Dungeons. Insight specific to the dungeon itself, specific to my class, specific to playing retail. Like, there are systems that I only became familiar about maybe a couple days ago. And the reason for that is twofold. One, I think it'll be entertaining. Two, I think if there's anyone else that is in my shoes playing Classic that has had the retail bug and the itch to get back into the game, I hope that some of the insight I share will be helpful. Additionally, I would like to preface that prior to going into retail, I had watched a considerable amount of YouTube retail content, and that also taught me a lot about Mythic Plus dungeons, which was, super helpful. Hopefully I can, if you're watching this, I can again shed some of that insight and sort of share my journey as things unfold. Now, to catch everyone up to speed here, so I didn't record my leveling process. I didn't record hitting 70 and doing all the quests and whatnot. Um, I think basically what I did when I hit 70 that you have not been caught up to as of this moment was me finishing the Dragonflight questline, doing potentially one world boss and maybe some primal storms. I didn't really know how they worked, but they popped up on my minimap, and I had seen in a previous video that apparently you could get gear from them. So I spent a little bit of time doing that, but I don't think I got any gear. So I mean, how is it that good of a time investment? I'm not sure, but it was time spent nonetheless. And then I've as of this moment, I've probably ran 4 to 5 keys, and none of them were recorded. So you might think to yourself, "Whoa, come on, Shindig or Silencer, you're doing us dirty. We've missed out on some of the best, most rattiest keys in the series." And well, you're partially right, but what I haven't told you was that once I hit 70, I ran with a couple friends and we did some low keys. I mean, there's no better way to put it apart from they carried me through the instance, and I got a few nice pieces of gear as a result. Uh, you'll see my gear here in a second. It's it's far from remarkable, and that's where we are as of present. So to recap, I have run a few Mythic Pluses, but there was nothing really remarkable apart from maybe seeing the way I play, which you'll definitely get a good idea watching this first dungeon. But all the runs I did were carries by my friend. This is the first run I'm doing where it's a pug, and we're gonna see how things unfold. So the first dungeon up here is a 12 Temple of the Jade Serpent, fortified, sanguine, volcanic. Now, if you're watching this as someone that is unfamiliar with retail, I just said a bunch of gibberish. Let me explain. So, how keys work is it's a scaling difficulty. The higher the key level, the more the dungeon mob's health and damage will scale as a percentage. So the higher you go, the more damage and health that these mobs will have. Additionally, there are these things called weekly affixes. In this case, we have Fortified, which increases the non-boss mobs' health and damage. There's also a affix known as Tyrannical, which will increase the boss mob's health and damage. But we're on a week where it's Fortified, so the dungeon mobs, non-bosses, will hit harder and live longer. Then we have two kind of, I want to call them flavor affixes, in Sanguine and Volcanic. Sanguine will spawn a little red puddle upon the death of a non-boss mob, and that puddle will heal any mobs in it and do damage to you. So it's really important that you drag mobs out of the Sanguine puddle. Then there's Volcanic. Volcanic is a very chill affix, as I've recently learned. Uh, it spawns these little volcanoes under your feet. You just need to move out of them. If you don't, you'll get knocked out and take a little bit of damage. Lastly is the seasonal affix known as Thundering. This will apply polarity charges to people in the dungeon group, and for 15 seconds you receive a damage buff, which you can clear by running over someone with the opposite polarity. If you don't run over somebody after 15 seconds, the buff expires, or well, it's technically a debuff. Then you will be stunned for 5 seconds and take ticking damage. Uh, if you get stunned, you're more than likely going to die. So it's very important to clear this debuff. But there can be some play trying to maintain the debuff as long as possible, so you're doing as much damage as possible. Uh, at this key level, however, generally you just want to clear right away. So up to this point, we've cleared the trash to the first boss and killed the first boss. Uh, there are a couple notes of note which I didn't talk about during the introduction, but there are some Hydrolancers which you need to kick, and Tainted Water Spirits that you want to try and line of sight the casts of. We'll likely do Temple again down the road, and I'll point these mechanics out then. But those are essentially the two mechanics you need to stay on top of during these trash packs. And in the case of this run, we did execute them perfectly, had quite a few deaths as a result. Luckily, no wipes. We did make it to the first boss, managed to kill the first boss. Wise Mari is fairly chill, not too much going on, but now we moved on and are clearing trash towards Strife and Peril, the second boss of the instance. So the things to note here are the Haunted Shaw. These trash mobs at this key level, and any key level for that matter, need to be your number one priority. Uh, Now we've already dealt with two at this point. They have one cast which must be interrupted. It is Haunting Scream. It's about a 4-second cast timer. If we do not interrupt this, it will put a 6-second fear on the entire raid. It's essentially a guaranteed wipe. So as long as we're kicking this ability, the rest of this trash, you sort of just press W, run it down, don't stand the swirlies. If you have a free kick and there's a mob in here that's casting something, just kick it. But otherwise, you just kind of run things down. So once you kill the Corrupted Scroll, you'll have to sit through a little bit of RP before Strife and Peril spawn. Now, the strat to this fight, it's fairly straightforward. DPS one of the ads until they reach 7 stacks, and then swap to the other. You do need to be careful about cleaving. How this fight works is when you attack one of these bosses, they get a stacking buff. If the buff reaches 10 stacks, they go immune and take no damage for 15 seconds. We want to avoid that. And how we avoid that is by swapping from one boss to the other once we reach 7 stacks. And you can see the buff on my screen just above the nameplate of the mob. Once I hit 7, we swap to the other ad. Now, this attempt is actually a great example of what to do and what not to do in this fight, because you see we do a great transition for the first swap, and the second one, a not so great transition. So there was still some cleave going on Peril, or some single target damage going on Peril during our swap. As a result, Peril reached 10 stacks and went immune. Now at this key level, you're not really concerned too much about the immunity. I mean, it just slows down the time, which, you're trying to beat the clock, so ideally you don't want this happening. At higher key levels, pushing one of these bosses to immunity, the buff that they get is a damage increase buff. So they sit at 10 stacks while immune and just crank into your tank. So a little scary at higher key levels, but for this key level, it just prolongs the time of the dungeon. So moving into the rest of the dungeon here, we have these new mobs called Shambling Infestors. Now, these things are pretty dangerous. They have a frontal which you need to stand out of, and they'll spawn ads which explode when they die. So ideally you want to have some defensive lined up for when they go down. Additionally, we have the Depraved Mistweavers, and we need to make sure we kick Defiled Mist. It's a channeled ability which will quickly bring somebody's health down. As we can see here with our Hunter getting wombo comboed, eating a frontal, Defiled Mist, and having ads die all on his death. At this key level, the ads don't really do enough damage upon dying to be threatening, so just don't stand at the frontal and kick the Mistweaver, and that's pretty much this pack. So moving on into the room of the third boss, we have one new mob in the Minion of Doubt. All this does is spawn a bunch of black circles in the ground. Don't stand to them, and the rest of these packs contain mobs we've already talked about. So just make sure we kick things, and that's pretty much this room. Be careful not to butt pull. There is a patrol, and these packs are positioned fairly close to each other. Generally, you want to pull these mobs back to avoid potential mishaps in butt pulling extra packs, as I may be foreshadowing. Now, in our group so far, up to this point, we've had 10 deaths, each of these being individual mistakes. We're moving at a fine pace, well on our way to time is key, when we have our first major blunder. We pull a pack with a Haunting Shaw, Haunting Screen goes out, and nobody kicks. Uh, the fear then sends multiple of our group members into different packs, and there's no recovering from this. There's too many mobs, too many kicks, and things spiral out of control. I could have played this better. I had kick available, and I didn't use it. This was one of my first times running this dungeon, if I remember correctly. Uh, in playing Rogue, this is something that I need to improve on. I bring a lot of stops. I have one kick, which I can use every 12 seconds, but I also have abilities like Gouge, Blind, Kidney Shot, Cheap Shot. I have many tools in my kit to stop enemy casts. And if I had to offer any piece of advice for anyone that's running Pug keys, don't expect other people to kick or do the stops for you, or to kick or do the stops when you would expect that they should. It may come at the expense of your damage, or your healing, or your ability to tank well, I guess. It's almost never worth not kicking or not stopping a mob when you have the ability to do so. Always err on the side of caution. You're not when you're in a pug, you don't have the ability to communicate with these people on the fly through voice comms. So expect the worst and just use as much as you can. That's generally how these keys are going to go a little bit better here. So something our tank has been doing here for most of the entire run is pulling fairly conservatively, doing one pack at a time. For a level 12 temple, this is mostly going to be fine, but the higher key level you go, the more you're going to want to think about pulling packs together. In particular, pulling packs that have few kicks, few necessary stops that your group can get away with because it's more effective to DPS more mobs. And as we see here with our tank pulling the single shambling infestor, we really want to pull this with another one of the packs. But with 9 minutes left on the timer, and still having 2 bosses to go and some scary trash before the final boss, in hindsight, we should have really pulled this infestor with another one of the packs in the room. Especially because these infestors have such high health pools. Unfortunately, our healer has to run back because we don't have another res in the group and our healer went down. This makes pulling multiple packs very sketchy, and we're forced to go one pack at a time to ensure we don't have deaths, and we still end up having deaths in this pool. So the third boss in the instance, Liu Flameheart, is pretty straightforward as a DPS. You're just hoping that the tank rotates their defenses correctly and can survive through phase 2. The general strat for this fight is to save all of your 2 and 3 minute cooldowns for when the boss hits 70% health. That's when she will transition into phase 2 and start chunking the tank, especially at higher keys on tyrannical weeks. The quicker you can get through this phase, the better. So, plan around the fight length, save cooldowns as needed, and burn the boss during phase 2. Now this boss also has a spinning kick type ability that melee need to concern themselves with. And after it goes off, it's going to leave these 4 patches of flame, which will spread out from the boss. So make sure when you run out of that circle, you're not standing in one of those patches. As we can see, I failed to do on the first attempt. Additionally, something I could have done better here was save my Shadow Blades, which is a 2-minute cooldown, for when we push into that phase 2 mark. Because I use it on pull, I don't have it up for the big damage check phase. Now, this is a fortified week, and our tank was decently geared, so luckily we were able to work around it without any issue. But again, this is some point I'm going to come back to multiple times throughout this series. Never leave things in the hands of pugs, or try to do so as little as possible. Using Shadow Blades at 70% was something within my control, and something that would increase the chance of us killing this boss. So I want to do everything I can in my power in order to best set our group up to succeed. Moving on then to the last trash packs of the dungeon. Now these packs are very scary. I would strongly encourage pulling these packs one at a time for the main reason that there are multiple mobs in each pack that have priority kicks. And if we chain pull multiple packs, we're stretching ourselves very thin on having enough interrupts in a bug, where you're not guaranteed that everyone's going to use their interrupts to begin with, or use them independently of other people. So, as we see here, the hunters, the hunters' pets go into the next pack. We pull it and we fall over because we don't have any way to control the casts that are going off. Next time around, we pull it out a little bit further, prevent any possible butt pulling mishaps from happening, and this pull goes a bit smoother. So we take care of the remainder of the pulls in this room one at a time, and something I want to highlight here, and this is pretty helpful for situations where, as you can see, we can no longer time a key, but we're still trying to complete it. A temporal attendant will spawn somewhere near the last boss, and you can use it to repair and also get rid of your exhaustion debuff from using lust or heroism, or time warp or similar effect. It's kind of Blizzard's way of saying, oh, too bad you guys didn't make a timer here. We'll make your lives a bit easier so you can get this dungeon finished. It can be nice, especially if you have multiple classes in your group that can lust, meaning you can kind of just chain lust on each of these trash pulls. So the final trash pull of the instance here is definitely the most difficult. There are several mobs that can dunk on your tank, and there's also a haunting Shaw that we need to kick in order to prevent the group from getting feared. We fail to do that here, however, by some miracle, we don't wipe and manage to hold things together, eventually taking this pack down. Finally, moving on then to the last boss of the instance. The only thing that you really need to know for this fight is that the ad phase, which happens every minute, is by far the most scary part of this encounter. If you have big burst damage cooldowns, in my case, saving Shuriken Storm, Shadow Dance, and Secret Technique, they're definitely high value for this ad phase, and you want to make sure that you're stacked up on somebody in the group. In our case, we have our tank marked with circle, so a good place to stack would be on our tank. This way the ads are all grouped up and can be cleaved down more quickly. Some groups will put down a world marker and say stack here. A common place to stack is near the steps leading up to the last boss. Really just depends on the group. So if you can coordinate that ahead of time, it's definitely good to know. And that's pretty much the fight. There is also a curse that goes out on 2 players every set amount of time. If you get targeted with the curse and your healer or dispeller chooses to dispel the other person instead of you, use some kind of defensive, the curse does chunk quite a bit of your health. But in playing rogue, I can press cloak when I get it, which is something I should be doing. Otherwise, this fight just repeats itself. There's no phases. Just do this over and over until the boss dies. And that's the Shaw of Doubt, and hence the Temple of the Jade Serpent complete. Unfortunately, we did not time this key. Overtimed it by a decent margin. And unfortunately, no loot. But we did get an 11 Algathar Academy. So being the introductory episode and all, this video has rigged out quite a bit. I plan to cover more keys in future videos, especially as we start doing repeat dungeons, where the mechanics and a lot of the relevant dungeon information has already been talked about. So next time, see how we tackle this Algathar Academy and maybe more. Anyways, thanks for watching. I appreciate everyone that's still stuck around to this point. We're trying something new with the dive into retail, and we'll see what comes of it. So if you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one.